A Chinese tenant committed suicide of an 18-story building. That's because a major rent intermediary company is stuck deeply in a cash crisis. The company is listed on the U.S. stock exchange. Are Chinese state-owned enterprises too big to fall? 10 companies failed to pay off $7 billion in debt this year. And the government watches on. Georgia's governor seems to have close ties with China. Is he corrupted by communists? A CNN host and an advisor to Joe Biden's presidential campaign attended a conference of the Chinese Communist Party, supported by party head Xi Jinping. And a new rule from the European Union targets human rights abusers. Their assets can be frozen and travel bans can be imposed on them. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A Chinese tenant committed suicide off a high-rise this weekend. That's after a major rent intermediary company stole a year's rent from him. This Chinese company is currently listed on the U.S. stock exchange. More on the story by NTD's Don Ma.
A college graduate in China's southern Guangdong province recently committed suicide by jumping from an 18-story building. This because the Chinese apartment rental company stole a year's worth of money from him. The company, Eggshell Apartments, functions as an intermediary between landlords and tenants. The company collects money from tenants to pay their landlords. Due in part to the pandemic, the company experienced financial issues and has not been paying landlords. As a result, many tenants faced eviction. As one of the top companies of its kind, Eggshell serves 1 million renters in China. It's currently listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Deceased college graduate Zhong Chunyuan's roommate explained the situation to Chinese media. At the time, Zhong had yet to find a job after graduating, so he took out loans to pay for his rent for a year. But Zhong later received a notice from his landlord saying the rent payment had not been received from Eggshell. He was told to move out within a week. Before committing suicide, he set his apartment on fire. He jumped off the building on the last day before his eviction. Other victimized Eggshell apartment tenants in Guangzhou plan to hold a memorial ceremony for Zhong on Saturday. But Chinese police soon stepped in, interrogating everyone who discussed the memorial. In the end, the memorial was cancelled. An inside source told us that local media were told they're not allowed to investigate Eggshell Apartments. China affairs scholar Xue Chi told us that Beijing also will not get involved.
The Chinese Communist Party does not want to solve the problem, but to suppress the person who raised the problem. For example, the Eggshell apartment incident, the apartment rent issues. There are many cases in China, a large group of victims. The Chinese Communist Party does not want to help the victims solve the matter. They fear that these victims will unite, so they suppress them.
Since the beginning of this year, Eggshell Apartments has experienced issues like broken financial chains, debt defaults, and evicted tenants.
Some consider China's state-owned enterprises too big to fail, but this year 10 major companies failed to pay off debts totaling over $7 billion. Despite the high stakes, the regime did not come to their rescue.
This year, 10 major state-owned companies in China have failed to pay off their debts. Their total debt defaults set a new record, altogether totaling more than $7 billion. November saw the latest wave of defaults. Within just 2 weeks, 3 major companies joined the list. Chinese carmaker Brilliance Automobile Group failed to pay off a debt of over $1 billion. For tech company Tsinghua Unisplendor Group, it was $200 million, while coal company Yongmei Group couldn't pay off its $150 million debt. In China, it's widely accepted that the regime should pay debts accrued when the state-owned enterprises don't perform well. But this time, Beijing hasn't stepped forward to rescue them. On the contrary, Vice Premier Liu He issued a warning, saying the regime has zero tolerance for improper finance behavior in finance, adding that these companies will be held accountable for what he called debt evasion. Economists say the move will reduce Chinese investors' trust in state-owned companies, leaving them to question whether Chinese authorities are able to save state-run companies. That's as a number of them continue to struggle. China's economy endured especially hard hits this year due to the U.S.-China trade war and the pandemic.
A former professor from the CCPs, or Chinese Communist Party school, will soon unveil an article detailing her political awakening. It records her journey from loyal party member to her decision to break away from it. She's also set to reveal how CCP leaders evaluate their party head Xi Jinping. Cai Xia is part of a second generation of high-ranking veteran Communist Party members. The CCP-run school that she worked for is used to educate and build future party officials. A report from U.S.-based media outlet Free Asia discloses some of the contents of her article, which U.S. magazine Foreign Affairs will publish in January. Cai's article will discuss two incidents beginning in 2016. Both played major roles in helping her realize her deep disappointment in the regime's rule. One was the death of Beijing citizen Lei Yang. Lei was framed by the police for so-called prostitution charges and beaten to death on the spot. No police officers faced punishment for the attack. The incident triggered strong public backlash. The second involves Ren Zhiqiang, a real estate tycoon and a member of the second generation of CCP leaders. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, all for calling Xi Jinping a clown and publicly criticizing the regime. Cai later wrote an article in Ren's defense. Years later, in 2020, Cai signed a petition asking for freedom of speech. That's after whistleblower Dr. Li Wenliang died from the CCP virus in Wuhan. Li was one of the 8 doctors trying to warn their colleagues and Chinese citizens on social media about the dangers of the virus. Their efforts came well before authorities announced the risks. The doctors were later silenced by police. Cai also wrote an article opposing Beijing's new national security law over Hong Kong. Due to her activities, she's endured repeated interrogation and threats from authorities. She was also told to keep each of her interrogations quiet, something she described as mafia behavior. Back in June, a video clip of her speech at an internal party gathering went viral online. She accused the CCP of being a political zombie and labeled Xi Jinping a gang boss. Cai Xia was soon expelled from the party and her pension was canceled. After Xi Jinping came to power 8 years ago, he worked to strengthen the CCP's ideological control. In her latest article, coming January, Cai disclosed some quiet critics of Xi Jinping's policy from inside the high ranks of the party. One famous professor who holds a leadership position at the CCP school reportedly described Xi Jinping as inadequately knowledgeable. Another party scholar said Xi lacks basic judgment and speaks without logic. In recent years, voices calling for Xi to step down have become louder and louder. Among them are CCP high-level party members, as well as others from the second generation of veteran officials. Cai said in an interview with Voice of America earlier this year, the party is now doing everything possible to suppress voices that oppose the regime, both outside and inside the party. The Georgia governor's close relationships with China continue to spark controversy. In a series of tweets, Trump attorney Lin Wood accuses Governor Brian Kemp of being corrupted by communists. Here's how Kemp responded. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
Georgia's governor has come under fire again, this time over his alleged relationship with China. In a series of tweets, Trump lawyer Lin Wood accuses Governor Brian Kemp of loving communist China. Of the videos he posted, one stands out.
China is a top source for imports and our third largest export market. We welcome thousands of Chinese visitors every year to the Peach State, and we are constantly helping to develop new opportunities for Chinese companies.
The video is from the website of Georgia's Department of Economic Development, and what Kemp said in it is a promise that dates back a decade. In 2010, when he was still Georgia's Secretary of State, Kemp met with the ambassador of the Chinese consulate in Houston. He said with Georgia facing an economic downturn, he's ready to spare no effort to promote the economic and trade cooperation between Georgia and China. The Chinese consulate in Houston was shut down this July.
We announced the closure of the Chinese consulate in Houston because it was a hub of spying and intellectual property theft.
And Governor Kemp appears to have a close relationship with the consul generals there over the past decade. Twitter users are circulating his photos with the former Chinese consulate general in Houston. Trump lawyer Linwood also retweets the photos. In another tweet, he accuses Kemp of being a globalist who has a closer relationship with communist China than with the people of Georgia. To which Kemp responded,
I know it's a lot to comprehend and get out because it's so outrageous, so I'll just stop you right there. Let everyone remember that Linwood was also telling people not to go vote for Senator David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler.
Over the past decade, he met with consul generals from the Chinese consulate in Houston at least 6 times. Last year, before former consulate general Li Changmin left his post, he visited Kemp in Georgia. And a month after the new consulate general Cai Wei took the post, he also visited Kemp in Georgia. A report from China's foreign ministry says Kemp welcomes Chinese companies to invest and Chinese students to study in Georgia. Juliet Song, NTD News.
Now we look to a conference organized by the Chinese Communist Party. CNN anchor Fareed Zakaria and advisor to Joe Biden's presidential campaign, Lawrence Summers, attended a conference last month. The international conference was hosted by the CCP. Every year, CCP head Xi Jinping supported the conference by sending letters or meeting with attendees. This year, his letter was read aloud at the conference, promoting CCP narratives such as so-called success against poverty in China. The nearly 20 Chinese speakers are all high-level CCP officials. It includes the director of a state-run think tank's research institute for Marxism, Leninism, and Mao Zedong thought, and a vice president of the Central Institute of Socialism, who is directing the United Front Work Department. The U.S. has accused this department of overseeing the CCP's foreign influence operations by coordinating thousands of overseas organizations to spread the CCP's propaganda, as well as influencing local elites and suppressing Chinese dissident groups. Titled Understanding China, the conference aimed to boost cooperation between the Chinese Communist Party and the rest of the world, and to, as they called it, build a community with a shared future for mankind. Well-known Westerners were needed to assist the Chinese Communist Party in this sense. Among the Western celebrities were former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown, sitting president of German Federal Parliament Wolfgang Schäuble, also a former German Minister of Finance. Are the Chinese vaccines for the virus effective? The Chinese Communist regime says yes, but Chinese workers in the African country Uganda may have another answer. 47 Chinese workers tested positive for the CCP virus in Uganda after they had received the Chinese vaccines. The Chinese embassy in Uganda announced the positive tests over the weekend. The majority of the cases are asymptomatic. A few of them had a fever, cough, fatigue, and diarrhea. Back in July, 3 Chinese vaccine candidates got permission from the Chinese authorities to be given to essential workers, including medical workers in China, diplomats, students, and workers sent to other countries, among others. This was part of an emergency program, although the vaccine candidates had not completed clinical trials at that time. Chinese media said as of November, the vaccines have been injected into 1 million people in China and claimed no one tested positive with the CCP virus after being vaccinated. Now we turn to the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP virus. Chinese state media, the Global Times, published an article this Saturday claiming that the CCP virus may have originated in Australia, even though currently it is widely believed that the virus originated in China's Wuhan. The article claims that the initial outbreak of the virus in Wuhan came from imported frozen foods. This includes Australian steaks. However, both the CDC and the Food and Drug Administration have stated that food and packaging are not sources of transmission of the virus. The Global Times claims come at the height of tensions between the two countries. Recently, China put a whopping 200% tariff on Australian wine. An expert in Chinese history and former associate professor of a top school in Beijing told us he believes China blames countries that have fallen out of favor with. He added that by blaming other countries, China will look like a victim. A list of countries that the CCP has blamed for the origins of the virus include the U.S., France, Italy, India, Spain, and now Australia. Hong Kong authorities arrest at least 8 pro-democracy figures for a protest that took place over this summer. The protest march has become an annual event in Hong Kong. Those arrested include former opposition lawmakers, incumbent opposition district councillors, and members of a pro-democracy party. The League of Social Democrats confirmed the arrest of 4 of its members in a Facebook post and called the arrests political persecution. Police also searched one member's home and demanded he hand over clothing worn during the July 1st protest. Police accused the 8 men of either inciting, organizing, or knowingly taking part in unauthorized assembly. They say it took place June 30th or July 1st, outside the Court of Final Appeal. Hong Kong citizens march every year on July 1st to protest the erosion of freedoms in the region since its rule was handed over to Beijing. A new rule from the European Union has been approved. It targets human rights abusers. Their assets can be frozen and travel bans can be imposed on them.
A European version of the Magnitsky Act has been approved. It will enable the 27 European Union member states to ban human rights abusers from entering the EU, freeze their assets, and prevent Europeans from funding them. Targeted crimes include genocide, torture, and arbitrary detentions. Lawmakers will sign off on the rule December 10th on Human Rights Day. The U.S. version of the act was signed in 2012. It specially targeted Russian officials who were responsible for the death of Russian tax lawyer Sergei Magnitsky. That's after he was assigned to investigate Russian officials over corruption allegations. Instead, the officials he accused had him thrown in jail. He died in custody due to torture. Reporting by Grace Wong, NTD News.
Chinese state-run media Beijing Review reports on Tuesday that China's per-person rice supply is higher than the global average. But multiple sources say otherwise. For one, China started importing Indian rice for the first time in 3 decades, despite a border dispute that began in June. 20 Indian soldiers died as a result. The number of Chinese casualties remains unknown. Indian industry officials told Reuters that Indian traders plan to ship over 110,000 tons of rice to China from December to February. Since the start of this year, China has fallen prey to the pandemic. Severe flooding and locust plagues destroyed crops, which drove prices of rice, wheat, and corn up in the country. Some Chinese media outlets estimate China's grain output will amount to 30% less than in past years. The Filipino defense minister said Tuesday the country has received $29 million worth of military equipment from the U.S. It makes the total amount reach over $680 million for the last 5 years. It's part of an effort to bolster the country's external defense and counterterrorism capabilities. Weapons, including sniper rifles and anti-improvised explosive device gear, were handed over to the Philippines by acting U.S. Defense Secretary Christopher Miller on his visit in Southeast Asia. The Philippines is by far the largest recipient of U.S. military assistance in the Indo-Pacific region. Last year, the U.S. assured the Philippines it would come to its defense if attacked in the South China Sea. China claims 90% of the South China Sea, which includes areas claimed by Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam. Tensions between China and these countries have escalated dramatically this year. Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen says her country faces military threats from China daily. That's as Beijing ramps up its military activities near Taiwan's coast, including regular Air Force drills. Back in September, China held combat drills near the Taiwan Strait. During the exercise, multiple Chinese aircraft flew across the midline of the strait. President Tsai Ing-wen's comments came on Tuesday. Amid the impending threat, Taiwan has maintained its ties to allies both new and old, including the U.S. and Japan. The Trump administration has also increased support for Taiwan. In its latest move, the U.S. announced a new arms sale to Taiwan on Monday. It marks the 6th arms sale to Taiwan this year, with $280 million. Beijing again threatened retaliation following the announcement. Mainland China considers Taiwan part of its territory, but the Democratic Island staunchly denies the claim. Now we turn to Australia. China says it suspended beef imports Monday from Australian meat supplier Miramist. Beijing gave no reason for the change. Australia is one of China's main meat suppliers. Miramist is now the 6th Australian meat supplier to have its imports suspended by China. Miramist hasn't commented on the move. Back in May, China banned imports from 4 of Australia's largest meat processors, citing issues with labeling and health certificates. It suspended imports from a 5th plant in August. The bans come after Australia's already strained trade relations with China recently took a downturn. That's after Canberra called for an investigation into the origins of the CCP virus in Wuhan. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.